Hi, welcome everyone to week 11. This week we're going to be talking about the personality, and we're going to be looking at the learning path that personalities go on. I'll be sharing my story kind of as a case study. So everyone is unique and is going to have their own individual and kind of collective learning path. And what we're going to see is that we all experience these different blockages in our lives. And there can be three different kind of types of blockages. We can have physical trauma, so like some physical issue with our bodies, maybe stress or poor physical health. We can have a second type would be like accumulated beliefs in our world or worldviews and our personalities that actually add to emotional or physiological stress. And another type of blockage that we can experience is from some sort of like lopsided tendency or imbalance in our personality itself. And this can be actually lopsidedness in some natural inclinations that are there in our personalities from birth. So these constrictions or these blockages that we experience, for the most part, are learned adaptations. Perhaps not the natural inclination, the personality inclination that we're born with, but many of the things that we experience as constrictions are actually learned adaptations. And so releasing the constrictions may require unlearning and then learning new, just may require new learning in order to move past those constrictions. So my story includes physical trauma. It includes just childhood experiences, many good positive ones, but also some really challenging ones. Certain enculturation, experiences that the cultures that I was born into and learned from. And then my personality inclinations. I'll share a little bit about all that. So in early childhood, I had surgeries on my eyes, two surgeries on my eye musculature, and that involved doing a muscle transplant from muscle in my left leg. So that was an issue. Those were issues that happened for me. Also, my culture, I was born into a Christian family, so I had a lot of expectations about me adopting Christian beliefs, and also that there were certain accepted roles for women. These kind of views of the culture were constantly being fed to me, and hoping that I would be conforming with the views of this culture. Other kind of more stressful examples or things in our families, like my older brother had mental illness, my mother had mental illness. My mother actually attempted suicide and actually caused a miscarriage of one of her children. And so that was very stressful. She was diagnosed actually with colon cancer when she was 44 and died when she was 48. And I was 13 years old at that time, and we had 6 children in our family, 2 of them younger than me. So losing our mother was a big event in our family, and then 2 years later, my brother committed suicide. So we definitely had family issues, there were cultural issues, and then kind of just me personally, what was going on with me in school. Some things I struggled with was some bullying, I guess you could say, from other kids that were picking on me because of my appearance. And I also just tended to feel very inadequate in terms of my intellect, which in a way a lot of people, it's puzzling for other people to understand because I got very good grades in school, but I had this internal experience of somehow I was not actually smart enough. So I felt very inadequate. So as an early adult, I started to experience a lot of issues, health problems, and I made a lot of fear-based decisions growing up. And I mentioned some of these in the earlier presentation about a partner that I chose, the profession that I chose. So in little ways and big ways, I made these fear-based decisions, and it had a huge impact on my life. But I was totally unaware that any of this was connected to what had happened to me when I was growing up. Just unaware. Eventually, though, I started to make some changes, and I actually started with just my physical body because that was what was those were the problems that were so obvious that seemed like I needed to focus on, something needed to change, and I could work on my nutrition, supplements, exercise, vipassana meditation, and through my healing journey, eventually I got more into things like singing and breath work, things that were activating the vagus nerve to help my physiology to really calm down. I went and did more movement practices and eventually started trusting myself more and did more self-guided healing practices. So this was a progression over many, many years of learning to care for my body. But did healing my physical trauma flip a switch that miraculously transformed my life? Nope. But it did help to provide a foundation where more of my cognitive faculties were available to me, such that I could actually study my personality more and go about raising my awareness about what my childhood-based beliefs were, and then go about practices that would help me to unlearn unhelpful beliefs. So some of the beliefs that I had kind of taken in were beliefs that basically most people were not safe to trust. I believed the world was really confusing. I always felt very confused, and it just felt so overwhelming. How did the world even work? But I felt like what was going on was that the world was really only accepting people for somehow perfectly good behavior, and smart people were the ones that made it, and it wasn't safe to ask questions. I had beliefs that I developed about myself. I believed as a female, I had to have a partner to prevent attack or poverty. And I believed I was ugly, stupid, and just basically not good enough. So once I was, again, more calm in my physical body, and I started realizing that these beliefs were here, my awareness was growing of these beliefs, I started working on shifting them through practices like meditation, excavating my memories, using my cognition to repetitively catch myself in false kind of limiting beliefs. And I used self-hypnosis, and I intentionally sought out new experiences that would help me to refute my beliefs. So I worked on this over a number of years, but did releasing my childhood developmental trauma miraculously flip a switch and transform my life? No, not like on and off. So what I had done, in seeing my beliefs, I had discovered that I had essentially these beliefs that I had, I basically essentially was just completely filled with self-hate. I was walking around hating myself every moment of my life. And once I got more awareness, particularly when I was at the barn, I could really see how I had consistently put what I saw others had in their view of what they expected of me, when I was consistently putting that first in my life, and I didn't really have a clear view about what I really wanted to do in my life. That when I just continued to make my decisions in that way, I was just giving up on myself. And so I started to see that I needed to discover myself. I needed to tap into and know, what is my desire? What do I want to do in life? What do I want? This is my life. So I found somewhere in me this courage that I needed to make changes and discover who I was as an individual, not just as the person who was the wife, the stepmom, the business owner. It's I just needed to be Bekah and go discover who Bekah was. And so that was a really important step, a really valuable part of my learning, to discover that I had done that I was putting others in front of myself, and I needed to intentionally be working on discovering my own identity and making my own choices. That was really important for me. And I kind of saw that sooner than what I started sooner than what I saw this other issue that started to become apparent. Because what I did is I went off and I went to discover myself, and in so doing, my personality at the time, like, I was behaving according to who I was at that time, and the behaviors that I did included things like moving all around. Wouldn't sign a lease. I started studying all these different disciplines, and I got close to finishing some, but not all of them. And it took me a really long time. Like the one actually that I really finished took me a long time to actually finish it. It's just, I mean, it's just what happened. And I crisscrossed the country. I only did short-term work. It's like I wasn't committing to anything. And I was just scattered. I was just all over the place. And so this was like me I'm in this phase of life, learning to discover, who am I? And I just had never really thought of myself when I would answer that question, decades ago. I would never think like, oh, Bekah's kind of this scattered person. I was not aware of that and about myself. I kind of thought of myself more like, I own a company. I keep things pretty tidy. I have a filing cabinet, right? But when I was off on my own, the place that I lived ended up looking like this. And that was just kind of an external representation of what was going on inside of me. And so when I finally saw that, I realized that I had this blind spot. It's like I think in my earlier life, I was so impacted by others that I was able to like create this environment that I was creating it really for all these other people, but I didn't realize that that wasn't really me doing that. And so when I didn't have the external influence of people saying like, oh, you have to have a business, or you have to keep your house a certain way, or you have to, do these activities every day, brush your teeth every day. It's like I was not structured enough on my own to be able to do that. I was this actually scattered person, and I was really surprised to learn that about myself. I just had a blind spot in that area, and I couldn't see it. It's like I was swimming in it all the time. I just didn't see it. So when I started to get more curious about who was I before the trauma, because I was wondering, like, when did this happen? Like, was I always like this and I didn't see it? So I was looking through some of my photos, and I saw all these different sides of myself, like the student technician, the peace activist kind of part, the partier part, the stylish friend part, like all these different aspects and qualities of myself. And I'm scratching my head, but like, who am I? This part of my life is meant to be me discovering who I am as an individual person. And yeah, who is that? I ended up looking as well at pictures of myself from when I was before my trauma, and so these childhood photos. And also I kind of remembered how my family would describe me as like moving. That was a big thing that they talked about. Like even in their stories, they said that, oh, you rolled, like you didn't crawl, you rolled everywhere. Before you even crawled, you would roll everywhere, and you just like all over the place. And we thought it was so funny. So I seem to be this very like person who was just like built to explore and move, to go about and just like spread all about. But I didn't really ever see that about myself until I started to see these piles, when left to my own devices, of clutteredness, and these piles of all these adventures and travels, and but then that had a dark side, in that I wasn't building a foundation for myself, and there was actually a lot of instability in my life situation that was also stressful for me. So once I had kind of, this took several years, it wasn't all at once, but once I had really discovered and honed in that I needed to discover and grow my individual sense of identity, and I needed to really learn how to be able to narrow down on things and build a foundation, be able to follow through with something and finish processing what it is I went out and explored and gathered, right? I needed to learn how to do those things too. And I have my inner trainer on board to help me to do that. And so I've been continuing to grow in those areas, and it's been really great. So just as a summary, my story as a person having, in my experience, I did experience, like, my physical body just experienced trauma in childhood. That's something that happened. And my physical, or my personality in childhood, experienced definitely stressful events that would be hard for any person to experience. And then my personality, what I finally saw is that I had these inclinations as a young person, probably tilted more in the favor of prioritizing my family's views, or my school or my church's views, over my own personal views. That was probably an initial inclination that was there in my personality. And also in my personality is tendency to want to learn, to want to gather new experiences, to move around and explore. Like, that was probably an initial inclination in my personality there. And so now working at narrowing down, working at growing my identity. So that was kind of my story. And let's see. So that's an example, a case study. And so we can think about these commonalities, or I go on to talk a little bit about the commonalities that we all experience. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about here is, the idea of trauma and the idea of these underlying personality inclinations. In the next couple of videos, I'm going to get more detailed about the personality inclinations, what they are, and that will provide more context. But for now, there's something basic about one's personality that you come in, and it's kind of pointed to by these things that I laid out in my story, which is this polarity between the tribe and yourself, like your tribe and your personal identity. And then there's this other kind of polarity about whether or not you are about more like gathering, exploring new situations, or whether you're about narrowing down, organizing, and perfecting one situation. So those kind of two different polarities there are in everyone's personalities. We can all do all of those things, and to different degrees. So since we have those underlying personality inclinations, it's like, how do those personality inclinations impact how we form worldviews in response to our traumas? This is an interesting question because, for example, in my surgery, say if there were 3 different kids who had surgery, there's maybe 3 different ways. I can even say 4. I'll give another example here, but 3 different sets of beliefs that a child could feel traumatized by that type of an experience. So for me, having that experience, I felt like my worldview became, the world is unsafe, and it's like, because people restrict my freedom. That's what I was actually physiologically feeling like in my life. If I would go to a group event or something like that, and I would start to feel panic coming up in my body, I realized that it wasn't this, it was like some sort of feeling that had some sort of this idea in it, in my personality, that had to do with, I don't feel safe. I just don't feel safe. This is too restrictive. I'm not free in this situation, is what it felt like to me. Contrasted with something like, I could have been a person in that experience, and I could have been looking around the room, and I could have been feeling like something like, all of these people are evil, or something like that, or like, these people are evil and they want to do something really bad to me or something, and hurt me in some way. Like, I didn't really quite frame it like that in my brain. It was a little bit more like, I just feel so restricted. I need to get out of here because I need to make sure I have my freedom to move around, or something is how I experienced it. But say, for example, you're a different person and you have a little surgery and you're the little person that really loves just being at home in your own space. And maybe you're stripped away and you go to this hospital and you have this experience, and then the worldview that maybe person B forms in response to the same type of procedure could be this belief that says, people tear me away from my safe zone. And so the world is not safe. People tear me away from my safe zone. So that person in their adult life might just constantly be kind of doing things in their life that protect them from other people, shield them, and maybe they stay really close to home, and that's their style. But that might have just been their personality inclination from the beginning, but maybe just now on steroids in a way because of that early trauma. Person C might have this experience. They may feel like, whoa, in response to a surgery as a child, they may form a belief that says, the world is not safe, or I don't trust people. Clearly, I have to go it alone, right? People aren't safe. I have to go it alone is a belief that they could come up with. Maybe person C might have come up with that view, though, because underlying their personal natural inclination in their personality may be along the lines of, like, they had a pretty strong sense of their own self-identity as a young child, and maybe they didn't have or weren't as swayed or as aware of what the tribe needed. And so from their personality inclinations, it would be more natural for them to conclude from this traumatizing event, like, how am I going to take care of myself in this situation or navigate this? Well, clearly I have to go it alone. I mean, it was like that's what they're able to do, so that's the belief maybe that they form. This is a possibility. And then another possibility, person D, who maybe is not as doesn't have such a strong sense of a self-identity, but instead is really relying on the tribe. They may experience that trauma in some way as some judgment that the tribe has made against them. And so maybe they perceive the surgery as some sort of a response that says, that says or causes them to have this belief that they're not good enough. Like, oh, I had this surgery, something was wrong with me. Now I have this belief, it must be true, from their childhood based, or their childlike mind. I'm not good enough. Could be the belief that comes from that experience. So same trauma, quote, same trauma, but different worldviews coming from that same experience. So childhood is a really long experience. Like they say, 22 years it takes for the prefrontal cortex to really start to mature. And so that the 22 years is a long time. So much is going to be learned. So many different experiences happen to our physical bodies, to our personalities, and all of that is happening on top of whatever these natural personality inclinations were that we came into the world with. If you ask any parent, at least any parent that I've ever asked, they'll always comment how their child right from the get-go had really unique characteristics or unique inclinations or preferences. And there's just a model that kind of I'm putting out there that says that when we look at our personalities, we can also not only look at our trauma and not only look at our conditioning or our culture, but we can also look at our personality inclinations as a model and a way to study our personality and study ourselves. And it helps to understand our personalities, of course, because it can give us an understanding to help to provide a framework that shows like kind of why we might have come to a certain conclusion about how we formed our beliefs or how we responded to our trauma. It's like if we kind of acknowledge that we have these natural inclinations and that we are always only using what we've learned up to that date when we experience the trauma, then in a way we can just see how normal and natural it was for us to form whatever the belief was at the time. It's like we were just doing the best that we could do at that time. And so in that regard, we can just feel tenderness around that wounding and tenderness around those beliefs that formed, even if they weren't really that helpful. It's like they were as helpful as they could have been given what we knew how to do at the time. It's just like a way to feel compassion for and tenderness for ourselves. And it's also a way for us to be on the lookout for what's going to help us to train now moving forward on our learning path. Because if we have an idea about what our natural personality inclinations were, we can kind of be looking at to see, are there ways that I can be improving an area that's not as developed. And so this just provides a really nice lens to be able to make some of those assessments. So based on this, I just wanted to add a little slide here at the end that shows a learning model that is a linked body personality developmental model. And so this model just says, when we're born, our bodies emerge and they start learning. This is life unit of the body. And our personality at some point emerges and starts learning. And our personality somehow is able to control intentionally our body. It somehow inhabits our body, right? And so as we're growing and as we're developing, our personality's ability to actually connect with our body intentionally and inhabit it actually is a development. If you watch really young kids and you see how they move, it's just pretty fascinating to see like how even just like holding scissors, a young child is like, as they're holding and using the scissors, you see how they're wanting to do it, but their hands are not necessarily as dexterous as an adult who has used scissors many, many times, and also who's used their hands so many times. The magical quality of, that moment where is it, where you're holding your hand and somehow at some point your intention actually moves it. Like, when is that moment? When is your intention actually moving your hand, and what is that intention? That's kind of an interesting practice to think about and to feel like what is the intention that is actually connecting to your physical body and creating that movement. That's kind of an interesting question to ponder and an experience to play with, but you can see how it's a development. Children don't have the same amount of intentional control that many older people have. They've practiced their intention, and that connection is stronger. And not only the intention to inhabit the body, but also the intention to leave the body. But anyway, so this is something that happens as a part of the developmental process, the link between the body and the personality. Also, the events that happen to the body, these traumas or events, poor nutrition, substance abuse, poor sleep, each of those things that we do as we're developing kind of represent these rubber bands of constriction that just like zoop go around the body. And whenever the personality is experiencing things like learning to any type of event, in response to that, it might form some sort of belief or model that might be there to brace or protect it from some sort of future pain. So that represents like a rubber band there represents a belief that goes around the personality. So it's like we have the body that gets these constrictions just to the physical body, And then we have the personality that gets these constrictions as well. And we have the personality that is learning to link and go into the body to control it. And so it's like the constrictions that are in the personality also become constrictions that get loaded into the body and constrict the body as well. So it's like the body gets the double whammy. Not only does the body experience the constriction of the physical trauma and all the physical stresses that we subject our bodies to, but it has the stresses that the personality, the constrictions that the personality has too. So after 22 years, you just have this rubber band ball. And it's very ironic because those rubber bands, those constrictions in a way, were really meant to cope with the situation. They were intended to help us, to protect us from future pain. The irony is that the constrictions themselves are painful, and they lead us to trainings like this one. So with Triplex training, as we grow our skill of awareness and intention, we can train to release the constrictions themselves, and we can intentionally assess, threat, and then choose appropriate ways to protect ourselves. So in conclusion, basically this is a learning path, and what has been learned can be unlearned, and new learnings can happen. That's just kind of a foundational principle of this training. So again, the 3 possible constriction points would be trauma in the body, or some sort of constriction in the body. Then you have beliefs in the personality. And then a constriction point could also be some sort of imbalance in the natural personality inclinations. So moving ahead with Triplex training, we're going to be exploring personality patterns. I'll be giving some talks on those. And then we're also going to be doing exercises on our personality patterns, on our memories, and on our dreams to explore and study our personalities. Okay, looking forward to it, everyone. Thank you.